Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm okay. I'm overcome with allergies. I've taken so many Sudafed, I'm about to be condemned as a potential methamphetamine lab.
Well, even if you don't convert it into meth, doesn't it kind of speed you up? So won't you turn in a really good performance this week?
It doesn't speed me up enough.
But it does, right?
It does speed me up.
I used to look forward to colds for that very reason.
Yeah, no, I'm sort of addicted to it, but they've now cracked down, so I have to register every time I buy it. So
really, are you serious?
if you hear a knock on the door, that's probably the police checking me out.
You can buy Sudafed without signing anything, can't you?
Not in California.
Really?
Yeah.
So is it? It's kind of stiflingly hot here. What's it like out there?
Stiflingly hot.
You know who I think is behind this heat wave?
No, I don't.
Well, I mean, ask yourself, who profits from a heat wave, Mickey?
Well, Al Gore, obviously.
Bingo! Bingo, bingo, bingo. Very good.
Okay.
And this. I mean, the rage builds up, and then he harnesses it. And, if you can invent the internet, you can control the climate.
Yeah, well, he's looking better and better.
He is. I still think he actually is, all kidding aside.
There was something on Real Clear Politics against him, but I haven't had time to click on it to see what he said that was so outrageous.
Besides, he's not an official topic this week.
Right.
So we can't go into this in any depth.
Right, so let's go to the topics that we've prepared so
assiduously for.
Diligently for, yes.
Well, the Middle East.
Yeah.
Things continue to go not too swimmingly. Do you have anything to say?
Why do we know that things are going badly for Israel? I mean, they say that Hezbollah only has... I mean, obviously they're losing the propaganda war. But militarily, why is it a disaster? They lost some soldiers, but they've claimed to have destroyed almost all the rocket launchers, and I don't think we don't know that it's going badly for them, do we?
I don't think we do know that they have not destroyed a lot of Hezbollah's infrastructure. I do think we have reason to believe that kind of wading in and establishing a buffer zone themselves is not going to be as easy as they had once hoped. And in fact, they seem to have given up on that. But
okay.
I think they may have done real damage. But I mean, it kind of gets back to the question of, leave that aside. I mean, I guess what I still don't see is how we're going to establish the kind of ceasefire the Bush administration is talking about, which is something other than an unconditional ceasefire. I mean, the Bush administration still has this. On the one hand, they claim they're going to, they're going to do this in a few days. It'll happen soon. But on the other hand, it's this kind of elaborate thing that involves the insertion of international forces. And I don't see how that works without Hezbollah signing on, and there's no provision, nothing that would encourage them to sign on.
Well, but if they, it's hard to imagine a situation where they can't claim a propaganda victory. So as long as they claim we survived Israel's assault and we stood up to them, then they can sign on to a ceasefire, without losing face, right?
But even if they sign on, they're not gonna. They're probably not gonna like the idea of them losing total control of that part of South Lebanon, and then in the long run, the international troops could face, basically an insurgency. I would be very, very leery of this. And I mean, an unconditional ceasefire, I think we could definitely get. And in fact, I think today Hezbollah has fired almost no missiles as this 48-hour hiatus, or it was supposed to be a hiatus, in Israeli airstrikes takes hold, and maybe that's a signal that they would be fine with.
Maybe it's a signal that Israel destroyed all their rocket launchers.
No, I don't think it would. I don't think it would be that crisp that all of a sudden they'd wake up and have no rockets left, whereas they fired 150 yesterday. But I think it's a volitional act on Hezbollah's part, but it may signify weakness, that they are sending a signal that they could definitely live with a ceasefire if that's what's happening. They're sending that signal anyway. As of now, 6 p.m. Eastern time, they'd apparently fired few if any missiles.
I thought you were going to claim to be eerily prescient because you said that Shabbat Farms, or however you pronounce it, was the key to a deal, and it looked, at least as of your last dialogue, that was true.
You mean more people are talking about that now?
Yes. One of the things that Israel could do is give up any claim to shove off arms, and then then the other guys have a face-saving reason to stop.
Yeah. Now I'm willing to take credit for questions.
I don't know what that does for Israel, since it seems to me Israel is in a little more need of face at the moment than Hezbollah. But
well, my plan actually, the Sheva Farms was part of a larger thing that would take a while to negotiate. That would also have the effect that would also bring Syria into it via giving back the Golan Heights, and would be like a long-term structural arrangement that led Syria to quit funneling arms to Hezbollah and encouraged Hezbollah to move full scale into legitimate political avenues and kind of truly demilitarize. But
sounds good to me. There was one encouraging story linked on Instapundit in the New York Times about how Iran is sort of worried. There are actually two encouraging stories. One is the idea that Iran would have caused Hezbollah to start this war because it felt cornered in the international negotiations over its nuclear arsenal. Hey, that's great. I didn't know they felt cornered. They didn't look cornered to me. So if they felt like they had to start something to get out of a box, that's a good sign. It meant that our diplomacy was working. And the
bad news is that they got out of the box.
The bad news is they got out of the box. Although there's some argument that the Europeans aren't fooled and they realize that now that Iran is even more of a menace than they thought before. And the second thing is that Iran now worries that with Hezbollah degraded, there's actually nothing to protect them from Israel. So if they don't feel like winners, maybe they're not.
You mean protect them from an attack by Israel?
Yes.
Oh, I see. That they don't have a retaliatory threat.
Yeah.
I suppose that's true. I mean, that makes sense in theory, and actually maybe that's one reason that Israel is so intent on degrading Hezbollah's infrastructure, because they do want to leave open the option of a strike on Iran's nuclear facilities.
Although that's not a prospect you look forward to, right?
Not with great relish.
Yeah.
No, I mean, things are about as active as enough for me. About active enough for me in the Middle East right now.
A bigger question is why does everything seem so gloomy and depressing? We've had wars in the Middle East before. We've had wars that ended in stalemates before. Why is this war different from other wars, as other people have argued?
I'm glad you asked that, Mickey. You know this hobby horse of mine, by way of answering that question, about the growing lethality of hatred, this argument.
Yes, I noticed you have an email to Kevin Drubb's site, which actually puts your argument much better than you put it in an op-ed in the New York Times.
Hey.
Way to save the cogent analysis for the big venues.
No. The New York Times op-ed was doing several other things as well. It was not, when I focus on the war on terrorism aspect of progressive realism, I can put it succinctly in, 800 words.
The email that appears on Kevin Drumm's site is very, very succinct.
So we will link to it, and it will have your...
Made it clear to me what your position is in a way that I wasn't clear before.
Well, see,
I had put it
exactly like that so many times before that I had forgotten that I had to put it like that.
Yeah.
But anyway,
one of the points is the growing lethality of hatred.
Precisely. The argument that for technological reasons, more and more, it's truer than it used to be and will be truer in 10 years than it is today, that hatred abroad can be easily converted into massive lethality at home. Hatred of Americans will convert, via terrorism and via the technology of terrorism, ranging from information technology to munitions technology, will convert more efficiently into the death of Americans. I mean, in principle, if we don't address the problem wisely. And you think that's at least possible, right? You don't think that's a crazy theory?
Oh, I think it's true. I take the position that it's so true that I don't understand why we're not all doomed.
Well, right. We had that argument 2 weeks ago, though,
when I'm still not
the 12
convinced.
Angry Men question. But leave that aside. This is an answer to your question. Why is it? You're saying why is it so horrible that the whole world, certainly including the Arab world, and to some extent the larger Muslim world, is seething with rage at Israel and at the United States at this moment because of what's happening in the Middle East?
Right.
Well, if you buy... I mean, this is the best thing you could do for terrorist recruiters. So if you buy my thesis that hatred ultimately threatens to come home to roost in a way that it didn't used to, that's why this is worse.
And it was bad in that respect that Bush seemed to sort of unequivocally take the side of Israel in his last press conference. Instead of even pretending that we wanted a ceasefire, we're just being awfully slow about it.
At this point, we're so closely identified with Israel that I'm not sure how much subtleties even matter. I mean, in the world of Al Jazeera, there's kind of no doubt that the weapons being used to kill the Lebanese are American weapons, and the identification is very firmly made in the absence of some sort of significant policy change, I think.
Yeah. Okay, but go on. I interrupted. Sorry.
Well, I mean, it's the answer to your question. It's like, after the 1967 war, a lot of people hated Israel. But, in those days, I mean, it was starting to be the case that hatred was more and more the enemy, and I think Israel's great mistake after 67 was to fail to realize that. Their defenses have continued to be focused against nation-states, so they thought building settlements is good, it'll get you more turf, and that'll be a buffer between you and the hostile nation-states. Well, no, it turns out building those settlements was the worst thing you could do because the enemy was going to be terrorism, and that was going to really gin up the terrorism.
But isn't it true that the hatred is much more lethal for Israel than it is for us now? In fact, one of your contentions in this email to Kevin Drum and on this dialogue is that it's going to take a few decades for true weapons of mass destruction to be available to small groups. Therefore, hatred now doesn't mean all that much. We shouldn't be all that freaked out about it.
I would not say that. I would say that was one particular kind of threat that I think we should be careful not to exaggerate, which is the threat of kind of weapons of mass destruction. If you look at the weapons of truly mass destruction available now, they are A, nuclear weapons, and B, contagious bioweapons for which we lack a vaccine. If you want to talk about things to which we're truly vulnerable, it's those two things. Well, there really is nothing in the second category right now that terrorists could conceivably have. But I'm saying, that is to say bioweapons that are contagious and for which we lack a vaccine. But as the decades roll by and the infrastructure of biotechnology continues to spread throughout the world, that will become a graver threat. But that's not to say that hatred is not a problem now, because now I think the problem is the kind of slippery slope problem of our responding stupidly to terrorist attacks in a way that increases the hatred, which increases the terrorism, which incites more stupid responses. So it becomes a vicious circle that does massive damage, even though for the moment they may not have bioweapons or even nukes at their disposal. It still can be a nightmare.
I guess that's right. It just seems to me, if we can wait several decades for economic freedom to bring democracy to dictatorships without worrying that much, it seems to me we have a few decades to let the hatred burn itself out.
Well, if burning itself out is what it would do in any kind of short term, great. But that's not the way it works. The hatred leads to terrorism, which paradoxically leads us to do things that exacerbate the hatred. That's what the Iraq War did, and that's what's happening right now in Lebanon.
Okay, what about the gloom and doom scenario? Even if, suppose there was a two-state solution in Palestine and 90% of the Arab world goes along with it, the 10% that doesn't go along with it, and there'll always be that 10%, will have access to increasing means of destruction and will wreak havoc. So there's nothing we can do.
Well, we're back to the 12 Angry Men scenario,
they don't
which
have to
we've
be
already
12.
discussed.
We have a lot more than 12
or something. Men. I mean, look, one thing you can say for sure, it seems to me, is less hatred is better. And if you come up with a two-state solution that the Palestinians themselves are part of negotiating and they themselves affirm it at the ballot box or whatever, and they say this is fine, and then they proceed to thrive, I mean, I think you've solved a big part of the problem. Not all of the problem, but there's still things that these recruiters will use, but that will no longer be available to them, and that would be major progress, I say.
Yeah, but all it takes is enough to kill you, and then anything after that is just bouncing the rubble. So you may just be.
Well, I'm not even talking about wiping out all of humanity. And surely you'd agree with me that the smaller the fraction of humanity you wipe out, the better?
No, I agree with that, but, okay. Well, you've almost cheered me up. As you always do.
I sure didn't mean to, because as far as I can tell, the world is going to hell.
Yeah.
We've got George Bush by my lights, does everything wrong, and he's doing it wrong now.
Well, and it was especially stupid if there was about to be a two-state solution that Israel would get distracted into this military adventure that scotched it.
You got to remember, the current government of Israel, I don't think wants a negotiated two-state solution. We've talked about this before. They've done what they could, going back to Sharon, to sabotage the emergence of moderate leadership on the Palestinian side. In a certain weird sense, they have been allied with the most radical, with Hamas in a weird sense.
You know more than I do. I survived 10 years at the New Republic by not knowing about the Middle East, so I don't pretend to know now. But there does seem to be this sense, and this segues into our next topic, that the world is going all to hell and it's all because of Israel. And that was reflected, I think, in the statements of a well-known movie star and movie director and producer in Malibu this weekend when he was pulled over for drunk driving.
You must be referring to Mel Gibson.
I am. And, there was also this terrorist incident and this shooting in Seattle.
And do you think we'll be the first to make a link between the two?
No.
No.
It's a big blogosphere, but I do think, for all the public protestations of solidarity between the United States and Israel, the veteran supporters of Israel are rightly worried that it could flip. There's an undercurrent that people dare not express, even Mel Gibson, until he's very, very drunk. That says that, gee, wouldn't it be better for the United States if Israel just sort of, if you could snap your fingers and the whole problem would disappear?
Well, it'd be great to snap your fingers and have all problems disappear, but, I mean, there are more moderate versions of skepticism about our Israel policy. For example, why don't you step in and do what would be good for us and Israel, and bring an end to the current fighting in Lebanon? That's being expressed. Tom Friedman expressed it yesterday on Meet the Press. Chuck Hagel today apparently is the first prominent Republican, I think, to forthrightly step in and criticize the policy on the Lebanon thing.
Isn't it clear we're going to do that within the next 3 days? I mean,
what's that?
Isn't it clear we're going to do that in the next 3 days? Step in and stop Israel.
Well, as I said, I think the only relatively easy way to step in and stop it is with an unconditional ceasefire. When you start talking about these complicated things the administration is talking about, insertion of international forces, blah, 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 it's not clear to me that they can pull that off in any kind of near time frame.
But in general, I mean, if you're right and the government of Israel doesn't want peace, and the only way to stop the Arab world from hitting us and causing us grievous harm is to have a two-state solution to Israel, some Americans are going to say, well, the problem is Israel.
They may put it that way, and it may, a huge debate may break out. I mean, I think...
Why doesn't your logic tend in that direction?
Well,
the problem is the current government of Israel, at least.
Well, the problem is the current government is... that I do say.
But they were elected.
And as the Israelis themselves get more and more militant during this very conflict, there's more and more that the government of Israel, this government is truly representative of the Israeli people.
Exactly.
But that's not a fixed fact that Israel would pursue policies that I think are bad for Israel and bad for the U.S. And the only way to find out whether it is for the U.S. to step in and try to exert moderating influence. And that's what Bush has failed so spectacularly to do.
I mean, I guess I'm tending toward the tactic of that a lot of Hollywood seems to be choosing, which is Ari Emanuel, the super agent, has a blog post, and the brother of Rahm Emanuel has a blog post on the Huffington Post saying Mel Gibson should be shunned. And I tend to think, even if he is an epic anti-Semite, which I grant, shunning is sort of the way to have things fester under the surface.
You think it's good that he got it out of his system?
Well, in a way, yes, because even now he is forced to renounce it now that he sees it in the clear light of day. Yeah.
Well, I mean, as you know, I'm a little bigger on shunning than you are.
Yes.
Although in the context of the usual debate, Ann Coulter if she just said the things I'm complaining about once while she was drunk and then apologized, I would not keep encouraging you to cut your ties with her.
Actually, the ragheads thing she says you have to understand the context. She doesn't repeat it.
Did she apologize?
No, but she said you had to be there.
I'm holding out for an apology. Anyway,
okay.
we'll come to her later, maybe. In fact, our whole outline is getting a little muddled here. What topic are we on now?
We're on Mel Gibson.
We're on Mel Gibson.
And anti-Semitism, and you were going to link it to the Seattle shooting somehow.
Well, not so much. I mean, it's just that you wanted to talk about Mel Gibson, and I wanted to talk about the Seattle shooting. I mean, here's what I'd say about the Seattle shooting. It gets back to this, one thing I've warned about a lot is that one of the real perils to America is that you start seeing significant, homegrown terrorism. American Muslims engage in terrorist acts. And that's why I said, you should be careful about things like ethnic profiling that might tend to alienate Muslims, things like your foreign policy, things like the Iraq War, things like our current policy in Lebanon. They might give rise to, to the onset of significant terrorism by American Muslims. Now, this case in Seattle, of course you can say, look, this guy was just a nut, and apparently he had an indecent exposure charge against him and so on, and was not exactly a picture of stability. On the other hand, the people who do this kind of stuff are rarely pictures of stability, and certainly the very first ones, the icebreakers, are probably the least stable of all. So that doesn't mean that he won't become some kind of role model if there is sufficient, rage and alienation in the American Muslim community. So it's the kind of thing that does worry me a little. And the way I see the cycle working is that, then something like that happens, we overreact, and clamp down even more on civil liberties or something. If a series of these things happen, that alienates Muslims more. It's another vicious circle problem. There's this blog that kind of, for me, illustrates the point by this...
By Roger Simon?
Roger Simon, yeah. Who is what? Is he one of the guys who started Pajamas Media?
He's one of the guys who started Pajamas Media. He's a mystery writer, and he wrote the screenplay for Hannah and her... No, Enemies, a Love Story.
Yeah.
Which was supposed to be a very good movie.
Okay.
He's a nice guy, too. But
now we've said two favorable things about him.
So now you can trash him. Now you can trash him. Okay.
Well, it's just that, I would think it's quite plausible that although this guy clearly had rage building up, this Seattle shooter who started shooting people at this Jewish center in Seattle, that probably things like the recent footage from Lebanon kind of, may have been the thing that set him off. And in my mind, that would be another mark against our toleration of that policy,
right.
of the ongoing attacks. Roger Simon takes exactly the opposite lesson out of it. He says, first of all, it's interesting. His reaction kind of illustrates to me, I think, exactly the cycle I worry about, which is people, something like this happens and Americans get more defensive and worried and clamped down. He writes, after talking about this event, I have to admit I am beginning to view the whole world as a battlefield. And he says, so I wince when I see various right-thinking folk putting the squeeze on Israel for a ceasefire because I have no reason to believe that spells anything but disaster. I mean, he doesn't even consider the possibility that actually, if we had put the squeeze on Israel at the very outset, and you'd never generated all this footage of dead civilians, that maybe this guy just never would have gone off the deep end. He writes, Hezbollah, a collection of vastly better armed and better trained religious psychopaths with the exact same values and attitudes as the Seattle Pakistani, in other words, the shooter, will simply take the opportunity to resupply and attack again. Why shouldn't they? It's what they are sworn to do and what they believe. God told them it's so. Well, I mean, actually, if you look at the history of Hezbollah, there seems to be a certain amount of rational strategizing that goes on. And in fact, it turns out Matt Iglesias linked to this resource, the IDF site, showed all the attacks that have emanated along that border from Hezbollah over the last few years. It turns out they've been going on fairly regularly. Hezbollah has been killing a few Israeli soldiers kind of per year, more or less, for the last few years. And there was a tit-for-tat game where there was some sense of limits and so on. So it's kind of not intrinsic that Hezbollah always go nuts. But more generally, do does he seem to you to illustrate the dynamic I'm worried about, Mickey, or do you have more nice things to say?
No, but he
about it?
illustrates the attitude you're worried about, which is, my enemy punches me in the nose, I punch him in the nose, and somehow this is going to end well. And I don't see how it ends well, given the trend toward greater lethality for smaller and smaller numbers of angry people that you identify. So I'm with you there.
You are. Good. Glad to have you.
But here's a question for you. You're a big supporter of the UN and UN resolutions. Aren't there UN resolutions recognizing Israel's right to exist?
Oh, yeah. The UN created Israel. Now.
Right. So aren't there a lot of Arabs running around who are defying the United Nations? And
yeah, if they say that Israel has no right to exist, yeah.
Doesn't that say something about the fecklessness of the United Nations?
What do you mean? That they're not...
Well, we have a resolution governing the border of, Syria and Israel, Lebanon and Israel, and these Hezbollah people don't even recognize the right of Israel to exist. Forget about the 1940 borders. They don't recognize it as a legitimate state at all. Neither does Iran, as far as I can see.
So you're saying that the UN should do something about that, or what?
I'm just saying that we shouldn't... achieving UN resolutions doesn't do much, and the UN's moral authority doesn't carry much.
Oh, no. Well, I think the UN, to be effective, would need, on this kind of front, would need to be significantly restructured. I mean, the UN is not an effective force in this realm in the way that it was intended to be right now.
But even if it has force, under your theory, as long as the people don't recognize the right to exist, any exertion of force against them is just going to cause this sort of vicious spiral of terrorism and overreaction, except this time it'll be the UN doing it instead of Roger Simon.
What, so you're envisioning the UN attacking the Arabs?
Well, how would you restructure it so that it would enforce Israel's right to exist?
Well, I'm not sure the UN could solve all problems. I mean, one thing, it's also true that there's a UN resolution about withdrawal from the occupied territories, I believe, and a lot of people would say Israel has not complied with that. Now, it turns out there's this ambiguity that was intentionally built in as to whether that means withdrawal from all the occupied territories or just some withdrawal from the occupied territories, and I'm not a lawyer, but
Hezbollah wants Israel to withdraw from Israel.
Well, yeah, we can't put up with that. I mean, and look, and if there is a... the UN should stand against that kind of thing. And the UN, I don't know what exactly the UN said about this. The problem with the Hezbollah thing is it was not a nation state attacking Israel, so it was a complicated thing to address. But the UN was designed to prevent aggression among nation states. So it's kind of outmoded, in the realm of non-state actors. So that's one of the reasons it needs to be revamped.
Okay, I just thought in Iraq, I've always taken the position that it would have been much better if the UN, all these things were done, by the letter of the law by the UN. But then when they're done by the letter of the law under the UN in Lebanon, it doesn't seem to have any effect. So another grounds for pessimism.
Well, I'm not sure but you mean Israel's borders aren't being respected?
Yes.
Well, again, the complicating factor is that it's not the government of Lebanon that attacked Israel. Then it would be, in United Nations terms, a much clearer case. Or, for that matter, if Israel stopped attacking and Hezbollah kept at it, even. Look, the thing about what's going on now is I'm sure that the Israelis are mystified as to why world opinion is with a group of people who are trying to kill civilians, rather than with the people, i.e. the Israelis, who are not trying to kill civilians and occasionally do it accidentally.
Right.
I think the answer to that question, aside from any irrationality that may be at play, to the extent there's a rational answer to that question, it's the perception that it is within Israel's power to stop all of the fighting if they would agree to an unconditional ceasefire. Where they're saying they don't want to do that. Hezbollah is not saying, I think, that they don't want to do that. So there's this perception that Israel could stop the fighting.
You think if Israel stopped the fighting, Hezbollah would never shoot missiles into Israel again?
No, I don't think that. And Israel's argument is it won't be in our long-term strategic interest to stop the fighting unconditionally right now. I disagree, but that's their position.
Right? Doesn't it have to do with the Arabs identifying with one side and admiring Hezbollah for standing up to Israel even if they do target civilians? I mean, it's all
doesn't
an
what have
ethnic
to do with
conflict.
that? I mean, that has to do with a lot of things.
Why the world identifies with the people who are not trying to kill, who are trying to kill civilians, as opposed to the people who are not trying to kill civilians?
In terms of the Arab world, yeah, there are ethnic bonds that are at play for sure, and long-standing antipathy toward Israel at play. Yes, I was thinking more like European opinion and so on.
Well, you think the European anti-Israel sentiment is only because they won't withdraw from the occupied territories and cut a deal?
That's actually not what I was saying. I was saying that it seems to be within Israel's power to just stop all the fighting now.
Okay,
because Hezbollah would buy an unconditional ceasefire. So in the immediate sense, at least, it seems to be within Israel's power. It seems to be within America's power, given how much leverage we're thought to have over Israel.
Right.
So I think that's the source of a lot of the outrage.
Yeah. Okay.
I think we've solved nothing.
No.
But at one point you said you agree with me, and I'll go find that clip and.
I agree with you on that too. It's a surefire way to end discussion and to move on to the next topic.
Yeah. No, but anyway, I mean, all of this is the reason I think it would have been better if we had, just managed to kind of minimize the whole border incursion from the Lebanese side to begin with, and not, and I think that would have been doable. I don't know. I think
in retrospect, that seems to be true, but we do not know how successful the Israeli military campaign has been. I agree that it seems ridiculous, this idea that they're going to dismantle Hezbollah so that they will never be a force again.
Yeah.
But we just don't really quite know.
All I'm saying is, given how much kind of antipathy they've revved up, that if we now have anything short of a radical solution that redraws kind of the rules of the game and gets Syria back into the civilized world and cuts off the arms flow to Hezbollah and moves Hezbollah into the kind of into the legitimate part of politics, unless we get that, I think the degree of degradation of Hezbollah's infrastructure doesn't matter. Israel has lost in the long run. That's what I think. And meanwhile, what's going on there now makes the kind of utopian scenario I just outlined only less likely. That's my view.
Right. I agree.
Amazing.
Our third topic is, or our next topic is,
Ann Coulter?
No, it's not Ann Coulter. It's American politics.
Oh.
There's this. It's another vicious spiral. There's this sense, and you could see it watching the pundit shows, that the Republicans have gone from pessimism, thinking, we're going to lose control of Congress, to optimism, where they thought that, the immigration issue and the cut-and-run issue in Iraq were going to save them, to renewed pessimism. And there's a vicious spiral that goes on there because there's a whole bunch of legislation pending in Congress, especially the estate tax cut, not a repeal, but they're just talking about it, raising the exemption and cutting the rates. The big pension bill and the minimum wage hike, all three of which are pretty desirable pieces of legislation in some form. And the Republicans are having trouble passing them because the Democrats sense victory. And why go along with the Republicans and give them something to run on if you're just going to take control of Congress in a few months anyway? And that's what sort of Senator Frist is up against when he's trying to somehow pass all three of these things, and he's linking them all together in a very cynical fashion that I find it hard to believe won't backfire. And it seems to me the Republicans are locked in a vicious circle, and the only thing to do is to stick it to the Democrats by passing a clean pension bill, passing a clean estate tax bill, and put it to the Democrats to vote against it. That's the only way out of this sort of jam. There was a very good article by Peter Beinart,
I was going to ask, does the solution you outlined address because he seemed to have no solution?
He's in theory happy to see the Republicans lose because in theory he's a Democrat. The smart part of his piece was pointing out that the Democrats are not split in anywhere near the way you might think, given the emotions surrounding, say, the Lamont Lieberman primary or war of words between the Daily Kos crowd and the DLC. Mm-hmm. He has this great paragraph where he talks about how welfare isn't an issue, crime isn't an issue. Think of all the things that used to divide Democrats: Jesse Jackson versus versus the right wing of the Democratic Party versus the Gary Harts. All those things have sort of disappeared. The only thing that's left is really trade, and trade can be finessed by saying we're for free trade with labor and environmental provisions. So, but what I don't understand is why is it so good not to be split? It seems to me the Democrats won a lot of elections when they were completely split on a crucial issue of civil rights, and so I don't quite understand why it's so horrible that the Republicans are split on immigration. It seems to me this charge that they've done nothing, which they're about to prove by doing nothing about these important pending pieces of legislation, is much more damaging than the fact that they've split.
So what you're saying, the Democrats back in the 60s when they were split over civil rights, they were still...
Well, the whole New Deal coalition for its entire existence was split on civil rights.
Yeah, but civil rights, wasn't that the beginning of a big cleavage that ultimately led to the Democrats losing all the southern states and to the current predominance of red states over blue states?
Well, ultimately because they achieved, one side won. Basically.
Yeah, so that's the downside of cleavages. I mean, maybe splits can be energizing or something, and maybe you can prevail over them. But when you start losing large blocks to the other party, that's when you worry. And I guess Peter's saying that in the next election, the Republicans could lose some voters, right?
Well, but suppose one side won on the immigration issue. I mean, I guess if the pro-amnesty McCain people won and succeeded in passing their legislation, yes, that could, result in Republicans so disaffected that they certainly didn't vote, but that they might even bolt the Republican Party and join some Buchananite party. So that would be the analogy with the civil rights victory, which drove Southern Democrats into the Republican Party.
Well, speaking of a Buchananite party, just hypothetically, what happens if, suppose this Lebanon thing goes on and on and on, and there's a more and more vigorous debate in America about America's connection to it, which party gets hurt more? Which party gets split more by that debate? I mean, today...
It's hard. The Democratic Party, you would think, would be split less, but just last week there was a huge kerfuffle over this Rahm Emanuel petition to censure Maliki for being insufficiently anti-Hezbollah. The Democrats were trying to be more pro-Israel than the Republicans. So there are plenty of, extreme pro-Israel politicians on the Democratic side.
Yeah, it's kind of not obvious to me, actually. I mean, you can imagine the kind of Midwestern business people in the Republican Party kind of opting out of the Bush policy. And for that matter, a lot of business people who don't like to see the waters of global commerce roiled, who are not quite isolationists, but like to see a nice, stable platform for capitalism and just don't like disorder.
I tend to think it hurts Republicans more. Keep in mind that the old saw, which I think is true, which is the vast majority of Jewish voters in America aren't nearly as right-wing as A, their leaders, and B, the government of Israel. So they're not, even Jewish voters in America aren't as pro-Israel as the pro-Israel lobby.
That's what they say. But Hagel was the first prominent Republican I have heard diverge sharply from Bush's policy, and I don't know if it'll be a sign of things to come. But he's Midwestern moderate Republican. He fits the profile.
Well, there's the whole strain of Bobby Inman, Brent Scowcroft, realist conservatives who were just disgusted.
The realists would not like this, I think, by and large.
Yeah. So I think, and I think the Republicans are hurt more. So Mel Gibson should really be a Democrat.
What's that?
Mel Gibson should really be a Democrat, under your theory.
We do not welcome him into the party, Mickey.
No, I don't either. Well, let's move on to a surefire hit-getter.
Yeah. traffic has been lagging a little. This should take care of it. Andrew Sullivan called Ann Coulter a deranged bigot, Mickey. And I think he's being a little too kind to her. I mean, she is a bigot in my view, but I don't think we should let her off with an insanity plea. I think she's a calculating bigot, publicity hound.
I can't believe you're taking that position. He said she was a bigot because she said that...
I didn't say that the example he cited was the best example. Okay, but as you know, I think she's a bigot.
No, we know that. But this specific event is she gave this answer to I guess Donnie Deutsch, the worst-rated show on television, the one that we're trying to overtake.
Yeah. He's looking in his rearview mirror even as we speak, and we are what he sees, buddy.
Exactly. And she said, well, she made this joke about how Bill Clinton was the first, was secretly homosexual because he was so promiscuous, and there was something narcissistic in that, just as there's something narcissistic in homosexuality. It was sort of a locker room bull session sort of discussion of sexuality, but it wasn't crazy, it wasn't bigoted, and it was based in a sound empirical, it seems to me, truth, which is that homosexuals in practice are more promiscuous than straight people. How is that not true? And she was accused of being a deranged bigot, and the aforementioned Peter Barnard went on Lawrence Kudlow and sort of demanded that Coulter prove you're not a bigot by coming up with evidence of this greater promiscuity. And she said, well, where are the straight bathhouses? Seemed like a pretty good counter-argument. You go ahead.
I guess. I mean, I'm not sure how much trouble I'm going to get into with my analysis or which exact interest groups I'm going to offend. But here's my line. I mean, it's just kind of amazing to me how kind of confused she is about sexuality. I think if there's one thing Ann Coulter would know about, it would be sexuality.
Well, I think she has a standard bizarrely, she has a conventional women's take on it, which is, what's wrong with these men? They want to sleep with a whole bunch of women. There must be something crazy about them. That's the same thing, the same view that Gail Sheehy has in Vanity Fair, that 80% of the women I know have this attitude.
You've hit on one of the problems I have with her analysis. She says, in the Donnie Deutsch thing, homosexuals are narcissistic because, after all, they're having sex with people who are like themselves. Okay, that's her analysis. Now, first of all...
Andrew Sullivan, narcissistic? How could that be?
Well, no character assassination here, and I don't know that he's any more narcissistic than, say, me or you. In fact, that's my point, is that there's a couple of points. One of them is that she's getting confused between male homosexuality and male sexuality, okay? Now, in a certain sense, and I want to be careful about this, but male homosexuality is a purer expression of male sexuality than male heterosexuality is, because because male heterosexuals, I mean, first of all, as you know, I believe that men are in some ways different from women. Male sexual psychology is in some ways different from female psychology. So when men encounter women in the sexual or romantic arena, there is some sense in which they are compromising with a set of interests that doesn't exactly align with theirs, right? And in particular on the promiscuity front. Males are more open to impersonal sex than females, I think, on balance.
Right.
Well, if you're male homosexual, you don't have to deal with that, okay? You're dealing with somebody who agrees to your rules.
Right,
and so to the extent that you see more promiscuity, you're just seeing what males would be like
if the
controls
women were
just
up.
like men.
Yes,
what male heterosexuals would be like.
If the controls went up. But you don't deny that in practice, in actual behavior, which is inhibited on the part of heterosexuals, that gay men are more promiscuous than non-gay men.
Not by inclination, but yes, in terms of behavioral result, yes.
Well, then Peter
because of the context.
Peter Barnard would say that you're a bigot, Bob, and you have to be shunned. And you have to
I'm willing to be shunned by Peter
for this bigotry, this blatant stereotyping of gay men as promiscuous.
Yeah, well, whatever. But the way she put it, homosexuals are more promiscuous, is actually not true. She's failing to distinguish between male and female homosexuality.
Well, okay, but I think she would acknowledge that.
Okay, but let me tie in the Clinton thing, okay? The other group of males who are not especially constrained by the usual constraints on the expression of male promiscuity are really high-status males who are considered very attractive by women, i.e. Presidents of the United States, or E.G. And Bill Clinton. So Bill Clinton is another example of the relatively untrammeled expression of male sexual psychology. So
I agree.
So a single piece of confusion on her part explains both of those things.
But it's a very traditional confusion, this latter confusion, this men, there must be something wrong with men that given the opportunity they want to sleep with a whole bunch of women, which, as we know, is contrary to the teachings of evolutionary psychology, which is that unconstrained men, of course, that's the way they're built. And women
which is
should
not
understand.
to say that women are never tempted by promiscuity at all. There are ev-psych reasons to think that they would be. It's just that the range of circumstances under which they find it intensely appealing is narrower.
Right.
And in fact, evolutionary psychologists have used homosexual behavior to document their case that male and female sexual psychology are different by comparing lesbian and male homosexual communities.
Right. So you're saying that her charge that she's not it's not an example of anti-gay bigotry, but she is wrong about Clinton being a homosexual.
Well, no, but there is a part of this where I think her tendency toward bigotry enters in, and it's where she says male homosexuals are more narcissistic because they're attracted sexually to people kind of like them. Well, by that standard, you would say that an extremely unnarcissistic form of sex, and so presumably a better one by her lights, is to have sex with sheep or heifers, right? Because they're very different from you. So that's not narcissistic at all.
That would be unnarcissistic.
That would be quite unnarcissistic. So what she has done,
but narcissism isn't the only pathology in the world.
What's that?
Narcissism isn't the only pathology in the world.
No, but along that particular pathological spectrum, she has characteristically defined the kind of sex she happens to prefer, heterosexual sex, as being at the perfect balance point. Okay, if you're less narcissistic, if you head toward heifers, no, that's bad. And if you're more narcissistic and head toward homosexuality,
so you're not denying that it's more narcissistic. You're just saying there's nothing wrong with it.
No, I'm not saying it's more narcissistic. Once again, I would say...
Well, you are.
Well,
you're saying there's a spectrum and she's looking at some...
No. I would say it's narcissistic to the extent that it's male sexuality. I would say male heterosexuals are more narcissistic on balance in their sexuality than female heterosexuals. So it's the same thing. You're just seeing a purer expression of male sexuality.
But we're comparing male homosexuals and male heterosexuals, and which is more narcissistic. You're saying that it's not true?
Well,
that when Andrew Sullivan looks in the mirror, he sees a person of the sexuality that he wants to have sex with. It seems to me that is more conducive to narcissism than when I look in the mirror, because I'm not attracted to the sort of person I see in the mirror.
Oh, that's a part of her analysis that just seems to be nuts to me. A male heterosexual, stud, an Arnold Schwarzenegger, will look in the mirror with as much narcissism as it is possible to muster. And it has nothing to do with whether the person he's going to have sex with that day is male or female. He's just thinking, they all want me. But that's the height of narcissism.
You don't think it adds a little extra boost of something that if you're homosexual and you're actually attracted to that person
I don't see that at all.
Okay, well I do.
I don't see that at all.
But I have one more point. First, I vaguely remember Andrew Sullivan at one point thinking, when he was editor of the New Republic, that Bill Clinton was gay. I think he thought that everybody was gay at one point, and that was sort of absurd.
But Mickey, you've been known to speculate about those kinds of tendencies.
Oh, sure. But I don't condemn
other
people as bigots for speculating about it. And the second thing is that there is something sort of fruity about the...
Something what?
Gay in the Sex and the City sense. There's something gay about the sort of oratorical gestures of really good political speakers, including Clinton, because all their gestures are very large and soft. So I remember Ernest Hollings, who's a great speaker and certainly not a homosexual, when he would say stop, instead of going stop, he would do this elaborate sort of flowery stop thing with his hand that I thought was sort of fruity. And Clinton does the same thing.
Mickey, are you sure you want to use the word fruity?
Well, I can't think of any less offensive term.
But if you could, you wouldn't use it. If you could think of a more offensive term, you'd use it.
There is a less offensive term, but I can't think of it. Effeminate. The word is effeminate. There you go.
What? So you think standard male oratorical style is effeminate?
I think people that are used to speaking in big halls develop an oratorical style that's slightly effeminate, yes.
Well, you know what?
Because if you made sudden masculine gestures, it would just seem really weird.
What would a masculine gesture be?
You know, stop.
They pound their fists on tables. And in fact, I think you know, if you look at someone who's well practiced in this art, like John Edwards, who's obviously kind of looked at films himself, you'll notice they keep their hands closed.
If Edwards is your example of an uneffeminate speaker, you're in deep trouble.
No, someone who has been coached to reduce the effeminate aspects by keeping his hands closed. Whereas if you open them, well, anyway.
Right.
I mean, you want to know who an orator who bizarrely, I've always thought, actually fits your description? Have you ever seen Hitler in action? Have you ever watched his speeches?
Oh, no, though he would definitely fit the...
but he's atypical in that way. He doesn't look anything like Bill Clinton delivering a speech.
I don't think he's atypical. See, I think the things that this is, you know, we're violating some basic rule against drawing Hitler in any kind. But the things that make him a good orator are probably some of the similar things that make other people good orators, and they have this weird potential interpretation. It's not a big deal. It's just a small point I wanted to make.
I would tie it to, like, romantic nationalism or something. To me, what struck me about it was how different it looked from the average politician. That's the reason I remember it.
I agree that pounding your fist on the lectern is a counterexample. That's often effective.
Okay, so I don't know. I guess we violated enough taboos for...
I don't think so, but go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, do some more.
No. We're through with this ridiculous attack on Ann Coulter for being a bigot.
No, and I substitute my own attack on her. Wait. Well, it's not ridiculous to call her a bigot. It's just ridiculous to... I just don't think this is the good example of it.
We agree on that.
But this does exhibit the tendencies of hers that lead to her bigotry, as I said.
It's a tendency that 80% of normal American women have, which is, why do these men want to cheat so much?
No, I don't mean that thing. I mean the narcissism argument, where if you're any more narcissistic than her, it's bad, and if you're any less, it's bad. When I put her on that spectrum and said she defines her own form of sexuality as the optimal, and anything different is bad, that's the way she looks at the world.
That's the way
her
most
religion,
of us...
everything is just
that's
the best.
the way most of us look at the world.
Well, some of us at least try not to, even if we fail.
Okay, well, we should all have your pantheistic, transcendent outlook.
Yeah, I was pretty sure I'd come out of that looking badly. I tried to stop myself in mid-sentence.
That's not narcissistic.
But it was too late. And so
You look at yourself and you see a wonderful, non-narcissistic person, which is very narcissistic of you.
Has it ever occurred to you, Mickey, that if everyone were like me, there would be no wars?
No. Did you want to move on to some? Did we have some emails to read or something?
I think we have some emails to read.
Okay.
William P. writes, "Where's my blogging heads? You are falling down on the job of providing 3 weekly installments." He makes a good point. In the dog days of summer, I have fallen down. All you can hope for is 2 per week. However, sometime in September, we hope, by the end of September, you will see the frequency of content not only rise to the level of 3 a week, but exceed that. We hope far exceed that. We don't want to say anymore. We want to keep hush-hush about Blogging Heads 3.0, right?
It's going to be a diavlogasm.
Beg your pardon?
Yes. I'm not going to repeat that.
No, I don't think so.
We're going to be hush-hush about the explosion of content.
Yes.
And we're not going to hype it or anything.
One other thing is I think we're going to introduce a comments section. Is that a good thing, Mickey?
I think that's a very good thing.
It worries me because I think then maybe we will no longer get good emails. They'll just spend their time talking to each other.
That'll be fine, but our emails are of very high quality.
They are, and you hate to see it wasted on us, right? You want to see it shared with the world.
Yes, because then they breed more comments. And you know, I haven't figured out why some sites like Bill Bradley's New West Notes have great comment sections, and other sites, most sites have awful comment sections, like most of the comments on the Huffington Post. I guess they police them somehow, but I think also if you're sufficiently sort of insidery, you only attract other insiders somehow.
I think the more traffic, the worse the contents is maybe the worse the comments.
I always assumed there was sort of a Gresham's law that applied, but I guess not. Okay.
Speaking of comments, I think last time I talked to Greg Dingle, he said he would welcome some beta testers for the comments section before we unveil it. So if anybody wants to be a comments beta tester, which I guess means you would go to this like secret version of Blogging Heads TV and you'd be able to comment. And
that's pretty exciting.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you want to do that, you can send in an email with a subject heading that indicates that interest somehow, and I'll forward it to Greg, and if I'm wrong about that, you'll have wasted your time. Okay, a substantive email about my argument, remember, about the snowflake babies and frozen embryos, and Bush saying Bush had surrounded himself with kids who were snowflake babies. They had been born from embryos that were once frozen. Right. And he said, see, if we use these embryos for research, these kids wouldn't be here. I said, wait a second, if you surrounded yourself with kids who were born to unwed teenage mothers, would that be an argument against abstinence by teenagers? Remember that?
That's when I had brain lock.
Yeah, so did I.
Okay. Has this guy sorted it out? Because I haven't got back to
not to my satisfaction, but Michael M. writes that the two examples are neither logically nor morally equivalent. Contraception prevents embryos from being created in the first place, while stem cell research destroys existing embryos, and he puts in parentheses, which Bush considers to be living human beings. And I guess my point is, yeah, but that's the whole question, is what he's putting in parentheses. And the fact that he can point to a process that would have prevented, something from transpiring, from these kids from existing, does not actually, to my mind, move the ball forward on his argument that these embryos are human beings. I mean, everyone knows that an embryo, if implanted, can lead to a human being, just as everyone knows that two people not using contraception, if attracted to one another and left uninhibited, can lead to a human being. I mean, see what I mean, kind of?
Well, doesn't that lead you down a slippery slope to the argument that people are killing people if they're not having sex every possible minute?
Yeah, that's why...
Why are you banging away on your typewriter when you could be banging away elsewhere, as Mike Kinsey put it?
You've really lowered the level of discourse.
That's a famous
Have you been
Mike
saying
Kinsey
that
quote.
Or something, or have you used that before? That didn't just pop into your head, right?
No, that's a famous Mike Kinsey quote against Jonathan Schell, who argued about he equated people not being born with murder, and Kinsey said, why is he banging away on his typewriter when he could be banging away elsewhere?
So he was employing my very logic. Well,
yes, and
first of all, I don't run into that problem because I don't consider embryos human beings, so I don't consider it murder not to have sex. But I do think, well, I don't have time to work this out, and I haven't worked it out in my own head. I think ultimately the argument could be influenced by a basic metaphysical question, which is more fundamental, an entity or an event? Believe it or not, Alfred North Whitehead, one philosopher, asserted that actually events, processes, are in some sense more fundamental than things. In other words, you could say about a human embryo, you could say, look, none of the material parts of that are even going to be left by the time it becomes a human being. Oh, you should view it as a process.
Right.
Just as two people who are about to have sex are a process. And Alfred North Whitehead, I think, would make that argument. And I think you might be able to make the argument that, look, the fundamental units are really processes, not things. And I think that would influence this argument. But I really don't think we should waste any more time thinking about it.
Oh, I think we can come back to it next week. I'll actually try to think about that. I failed to try to unlock my brain.
David B. on income inequality just says that, on the question of whether income inequality leads to social inequality, he says, it seems to me that not only must it inevitably do so, but that increasing social inequality is the point of the efforts by the would-be overclass to increase economic inequality, like huge tax cuts for the super-rich and no enforcement to get them to pay the taxes that remain. In almost all other places and almost all other times, being rich also meant higher social status and in very manifest ways. Special clothes, titles, speeches, privileges.
But I just don't see that on the, I mean, living on the west side of Los Angeles where there are vast extremes of wealth and poverty, the rich people I know, a lot of their efforts go toward living a rich common life, and a lot of the reasons they want to accumulate wealth is to escape specifically, crime in the underclass and sort of things that would prevent the public schools from being public schools. So they amass a lot of money so they can send their kids to private schools. But it's not really, except in a few sort of pathological cases, a one-upping of status. I mean, obviously can be.
Well,
but I just don't sense that.
I think there are 2 points in his argument. One of them I buy. You just said that you don't think the accumulation of wealth is a one-upping of status. I think it is. I think that is a lot of the imperative. It's just that I don't think fundamentally rich people see themselves as competing with poor people. I think they're trying to outdo the people who live next door to them. They're trying to outdo the person in the office next to them. So on. That's what I would buy the dynamic he's describing, but be a little less...
I think they want to get better cars and bigger houses and nicer swimming pools, and
they do, and
they don't see that as
but look at these houses they're building, Mickey. I doubt, if you look at suburban Connecticut or whatever, these houses, I think people live and die without ever walking in all parts of these houses. They're so big, it's absurd. There's no practical need for those.
There's some of that going on. I agree with that.
His P.S. I think Bert and Ernie are a better analogy than Oscar and Felix. Felix gets on Oscar's nerves, and Oscar would be just as happy to be left alone. Ernie, on the other hand, loves getting a rise out of Bert. But let's don't have a Bert and Ernie contest right now, Nicky.
Let's not, especially since I've never seen Bert and Ernie.
Yeah, I don't know them either, but he may have a good point. I mean, I can vaguely envision them, but I don't know which is which. Okay, then an email from someone who wants to be known as Wolf, his last name, because his first name is too distinctive. He's a guy who writes in and rags on me all the time, like here he says, Wright tends to react badly when people disagree with him. It looks like indignation. Ha! But anyway, what I want to point to is, at the very end, this is disturbing. He says, you're brave guys to put yourselves into the vulnerable position BHTV puts you in. Few who would merit an audience could bear the scrutiny. Mickey, I had always thought that we were doing this just because kind of we had the technology or something, and soon everyone would, but... Do you think it's true that kind of wiser heads would not? You know what I'm saying?
I thought I saw some hesitance on Dresner's part. I mean, he has tenure, but he doesn't want to make a complete fool of himself the way
he was pretty game.
I sometimes do for some.
He was pretty game. He put on a Boston Red Sox hat when he talked about sports.
Really? Okay, I missed that part.
Yeah.
Cheap use of props is a good way to.
Yeah.
But he. It's a good question. If I thought, if I thought we had a big enough audience that I was actually doing myself damage, I would worry about it. But, it's just you and me and 3 emailers. So
that's right.
Who cares?
Who cares? A critique of your, from Elizabeth, a critique of your lighting.
I know.
You made a reference to Klieg lights. She says, he's shiny, his highlights are washing out. One word, overlit. A few warm practicals, such as the ones Bob has carefully placed around the camera and in the background. She may be referring to the lamp that is often lit.
I tried to follow her advice. For example, turning off one of my brighter lights, and I didn't think I'm doing that right now. I don't think the result's very good. So I think I just have to buy some more warm lights with sort of filters.
Got good news for you, Mickey. She says, I have friends who could help, and she lives in your area.
That's okay. I have friends who have offered to help, too.
Yeah, but maybe hers are more interesting than yours. You know what I'm saying?
It's possible, but the friend... Anyway, the friend who offered to help makes his living in the TV business, so...
I don't think you know what I'm saying, Mickey.
I know what you're saying, Bob. It's a cheap innuendo that married people often make when talking to their single friends.
She writes, we're just natural daylight. Even candlelight would be better. Candlelight, Mickey. Think about it.
I'll try candlelight. Sounds like a fire hazard.
That's not what I meant. Okay, well, I apologize for cheap innuendo. I actually had an even cheaper email I was going to read that referred to you, but I'm going to refrain from that.
Let's not do that. But I think I'm allergic to candles. But that would be Felix of me to bring that up, so I won't.
And we don't want to get into that, do we?
No.
Okay.
We've gone an hour and 4 minutes.
That's become the norm, but
it has.
They don't have to watch the whole thing, and many don't.
That's what you say. I still think it would be better if it were shorter and crisper.
I'm game.
Okay. Next time.
Next time.
Cool.
All right. See you around.
See ya. Bye.